We are back after our lunch break for the conclusion of Council's 2020 budget discussions. There were a couple of other referred items before we get to open space in the agenda for other things council members may wish to bring up. I think our next item, remembering the slides, was a discussion around something in the community services area and pickleball. Is that correct? So I'll look to Director Miller to refresh us about where we are with this issue. What's been
Thanks, Mayor Given. So it was at the July 15th council meeting. There was a motion made to refer and ask for $55,000 to budget deliberations to support pickleball. So right now the status of pickleball is they do have a plan to proceed with it in 2020. They've applied for a grant from Rotary, I believe, to the tune of $80,000. And they have a two-phased approach to bring us pickleball courts at on the north end at the Leisure Centre. Or the Legion, the tennis courts, whatever. I can't recall the exact name of it right now, but so they're asking for $55,000 from the city, and then part of the plan is $20,000 from the Alberta Summer Games Legacy Fund. The pickleball club is committed to $25,000 as their contribution, and then the $80,000 from Rotary. And with that, they feel they would be able to provide a very good facility for our community. And then they would also they would oversee the construction project is what the plan is, and then also look after operating for the future.
Thanks very much. So with that information, so the request, just to be crystal clear before we get into making motions, Director Miller, the request, the financial implication for the 2020 budget is the request of $55,000 in cash.
That's correct.
Okay. I see Councillor Friesen is first in the queue. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to make this motion to support pickleball for the amount of $55,000 to be paid out of our council strategic fund. And the reason that I am doing this is because I know we had talked about it last year. This is where we talked about bringing the funds from, and then we decided to refer it to the Recreation Committee, which didn't go anywhere. So now pickleball's had to wait another year for us, but I want to make the motion today, and I would encourage council to support this. It's a wonderful sport that is very new to Grande Prairie, and there's a lot of interest in and a great group behind it. So let's support pickleball, shall we?
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. So motion to support $55,000 in capital contribution towards the pickleball project to be funded from Council Strategic Initiatives Fund. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Just a clarification, maybe I wasn't at that meeting or I can't remember. Is that going to be on land that could possibly be changed over when there's new construction happening, when the Composite High School and the Leisure Centre come down?
Director Miller.
How is this going to affect that?
Thanks, Mayor Given. This land won't be affected by the school project. We're well aware of that pending project, and in consultation with Sports Development, Wellness and Culture, that they recommend we can use this site proceeding into the future.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I'll be supporting this.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. I don't see anybody else in the queue. That being the case, I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. We did have another item up on that slide with respect to SCORE's capital funding. Director Miller.
Thanks, Mayor Given. So it's $800,000 that we have set aside right now. It's part of the SCORE's agreement. It's money that's accumulated for the last couple of years. And if council remembers, there was a project that was brought forward at committee and never moved forward, working with the school districts. So that money is sitting there, and administration's intent is we don't have any other projects identified right now, so we're recommending to move this to the reserve and unrestricted. And then as projects come forward in the future, we'll bring individual projects to committee for support or for consideration.
And so when you say reserve, is it
future expenditures reserve?
FER. Okay, future expenditures reserve. So administration's recommendation is a specific council motion to redirect these funds that are unexpended to that reserve. Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, Mayor Given, I'd like to make that motion to take these funds and put them into the administration's requested reserve.
Okay. Motion to direct those funds to the reserve as recommended by administration. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And we had one emergent need request. This is not a referral from council, so much it is a result of recent council decisions and initiatives in the community. Director Emanuel.
Okay, so as council's aware, the Rotary Club of Grande Prairie gave us $1 million donation to establish a day shelter program in the city. The intent now is administration's proceeded with the offer to purchase on a building, and renovation is occurring to make the space usable. Should be occupied sometime around March. The intent is to have a nonprofit organization operate the facility on our behalf and provide services. That being said, given the funding that's available to provide daytime shelter services, at this point, we have limited funds that can be allocated during a winter emergency response, which is essentially provincial pass-through dollars that cover about 6 months of the year, which means there's 6 months of the year outside of the winter, which require funding. Now, in the future, part of the reason behind working with an NGO to provide this service is the ability to do fundraising and those sorts of things to gain other financial contributions to support the operation. That being said, on the day it opens this March or early April, I suspect that there's going to have to be some transitionary funding anyways to provide for operations to be established and get that program really moving forward. It's at a base, our minimum obligations as per our agreement with Rotary is that we will provide utilities and maintenance of the building, which is anticipated to cost somewhere around $30,000 annually. So anything we do to support operations would be in addition to that. It's the preliminary budget I've seen around to operate the facility year-round as a 7-day-a-week program is approximately $397,000. Of that, somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 is already being allocated through the winter emergency funds. So there is still some gap there, and I suspect that for this initial year, until we have an understanding of what the community support will be to support the NGO going in there, that it would be prudent for us to at least have a pool of money allocated that we could direct to help support this initiative, to allow it to establish and to really have the desired effects to prevent the things such as the unlawful encampments that we saw this past year. And just to understand, if we don't get ahead of the preventative measures, the response that we have to do in the case of the temporary transition site can actually be far more costly than the preventative piece is. Our 4-week transitional period was approximately $100,000, or actually in excess of $100,000, just to maintain camps. So I ask for your consideration.
Okay. And so for clarity, the request or recommendation here for administration is that council approve an operational change to the operation plan to fund $30,000 per year. Is that?
Yeah, so I guess I'd see the request in two forms. So one request would be we have an obligation, I believe, to do the $30,000 to support the utilities and preventive maintenance piece. And I think it would also be prudent for council to consider allocating some degree of contingency funding that's available for administration, perhaps with council's approval, to draw down upon to provide some operating support to get this initiative moving.
Thank you. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Just a question, Director Manuel. So the decision we're being asked today is just for the $30,000 utilities support. Does that mean that in the next year we will be discussing with council at committee level or otherwise what portion of that remaining $247,000 we'd be potential to have to support, or a portion of that we will support? Sorry, just the 30,000 this year, right? That's the decision we're making.
No. So 30,000 is a motion, is one motion. I think a separate motion would have to be either using council strategic fund. If it's not council strategic fund, it is just a general addition to our 2021 budget that will provide at least a placeholder to allow for allocation of funds if they need to be drawn down upon.
Okay, yeah. With knowing that, I guess I'll make the first motion, then we can enter into discussion debate. But I would move that council support the request for $30,000 to cover utilities and other supports, maintenance supports in the building.
Okay, thanks very much. So a motion specific to essentially to the operations of the physical building, not the operations of the services within the building, specific to the $30,000 that we saw on the slide there. Discussion debate, Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Giving. I'm just trying to I appreciate the intent of what we're trying to do here, but I'm just wondering what the funding source is going to be if we approve it like this. Let's just be on operating then?
Dr. Manuel?
I would see it as being operating. I'll look over to Susan, but I believe that's correct.
Councillor Palat, I essentially, through the agreement with the Rotary Clubs, they purchased the building and have, in essence, donated the building to the city. We're now the owner of the building, and we will have a utility maintenance cost in that building on an ongoing basis. And I think administration's recommendation is that basic level of ownership of the building, those associated costs are $30,000, so I would imagine that's an ongoing cost. Seeing Director Manuel nodding.
So I guess I'm going to offer an amendment on this one for the funding source. As we're trying to put a number out, which I appreciate, we're trying to put a number out so we know kind of where we're going to be in the future. I'd like to see this come out of our Council Strategic Initiatives Fund, or specifically the Housing Affordability one, because I think this is around that. But I think out of the Strategic Fund is where I would like to see this come for the first year, and then figure out what the costs are going to be, and then it'll have it going into operating in our 2021 budget.
You're making an amendment?
To the funding source, because when I'd asked, it sounds like the funding source currently would be operating.
Dr. Manuel?
So I get the intent there. What I would suggest is the utilities piece, the preventative maintenance, that is frankly going to be an ongoing expense that's going to continue over the life of the asset. Now, the other component, which would be what I'm saying is probably those one-time startup dollars that we have to see what impacts or what costs will be necessary to cover. That probably makes more sense from a one-time investment as opposed to ongoing. So I actually see the utility piece being embedded into the ongoing operating budget, and then any additional funding that I was referring to, that could potentially be one-time funds.
Okay, and we won't be aware of those till probably sometime in the new year, or?
Correct. We're still a little early on the exact costing of that.
Okay, for that, then I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, thanks very much. So the motion as it stands, Councillor Thiessen's motion is that Council approve amending the operating budget to include $30,000 for the operation of this new city asset. And I think an acknowledgement that that's just something that probably we won't see in future years. It just will be embedded into the city's base budget because we own a building and we got to keep the lights on and fix stuff. There's a separate discussion about learning about how this program runs that we'll discuss separately next. Any other discussion or debate on Councillor Thiessen's motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Okay, now we have the second portion that I understood Director Manuel say this is a new service and a new building, and at this stage, administration's recommendation is that there should be some financial flexibility to deal with unexpected issues that may arise in terms of operation. Yeah, but this is not the delivery of the programming within the building. It's having some financial flexibility to deal with the other issues that might arise. Is that correct, Director Manuel?
Actually, we believe we're actually well financed as far as the establishment of the actual facility, the program, the furniture, all that. What I'm actually suggesting is I think there may need to be some degree of operating support for the agency going in, just because it is whoever's going to go in there hasn't had the benefit of doing any sort of fundraising project to this point before their operations initiate. So I believe there's going to have to be some transitionary.
Okay, so startup funding. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I see Councillor Friesen in the queue.
Thank you. I'd like to move that council provide $100,000 contingency for this new program in our building from the funding source to be the affordable housing allocation of our strategic funds.
Strategic initiatives. Okay. Okay, so that motion specific, identifying the $500,000 that council had set aside for affordable housing. The intent of this motion would be to use a portion of that to cover the contingency or startup contingency for this operation. Any discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. I think that's the end of the items that were... Okay, something further on that issue. Councillor Bressie.
Great. I've got a question for administration that will probably lead to a motion I'm going to make, but that is my understanding of the $1 million grant from Rotary is that's just to cover the actual building and what's actually happening in the building. Is there any funding set aside for physical improvements in the immediate exterior area to mitigate impacts?
Director Manuel.
Yeah, so Rotary gave us the benefit of giving us the $1 million to do the purchase and improvements. Now, the improvements are not entirely interior. Actually, if you were to go by the site today, you'll see that there is exterior improvements that are going to occur as well, where we're doing fencing and courtyards and those sorts of things. But that will be contained to the specific parcel, right? So any funding we want to offer to support physical improvements in the adjacent area, at this point, we do not have a source.
I'm going to make a motion.
Councillor Bressie.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor Given. With that in mind, I'm going to make a motion that council set aside, let me think how I want to word this, set aside $50,000 for physical improvements in the adjacent neighborhood to the daytime shelter space to mitigate safety concerns. Funding source being capital tax. Before I speak to it, I'll just ask, is that an okay motion?
I think it covers the points. The intent, it sounds like it's $50,000, which is specific, obviously. It is not from the council strategic initiatives. It is from capital tax. It is intended to be physical improvements, not extra security or operational sort of things, and would give administration the latitude to identify those things that need to be done that are not at a part of the parcel where the program actually is, but that are in the area.
Great. Well, and then to speak to that, I think this is important in terms of we had a delegation come to committee this week specifically asking for physical improvements from a crosswalk to potential funding, pointed out that there's a need from a property owner's perspective in the area. And that certainly wasn't the first time I thought that. I've thought for a while that even before this daytime shelter space was going in place, I wondered if there might be ways we can minimize impact in the immediate area through physical improvements. I think that's especially needed now that this is here. I don't know specifically what's needed, but I do think something's needed, and I'd like us to have funding to be able to do that over the next year.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I like the intention of this, and I was going to make a similar motion, but I don't want to support this because I want to know what the amount's going to be. I think, it's nice to earmark some money for it specifically. But I think if we're talking about accounts coming out of account, we have council strategic initiatives. If there's something like that needs to come, I would hope administration would bring it to us and we could have that conversation. So I don't know if I really support us just putting some money out there like that. I'll be making a motion after this that I think could capture this, and administration would have an option if that was passed. But I think for now, I can't support the motion.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Palat. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I just want to thank Councillor Bressie for making this motion. I think it's very thoughtful and very forward-thinking. I'm curious as to what Councillor Palat may have brewing, but for the meantime, I'm going to support this motion. I think having that extra latitude and making that funding commitment doesn't just send a message to the delegation that came and spoke at the committee meeting, but to the rest of the businesses that might be affected in the area as well. We may be looking at one side when we need to be looking at all sides of the building in potential, and whatever improvements need to be made to make it safer. That could be anything from like video cameras to more fencing to a pathway to a crosswalk, as Councillor Brescia already said. So for all those reasons, I think this is money that will be well spent, and I think administration will find a good way to utilize it and maximize the safety that this is intended to produce.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. For Protective and Social Services Director Chris Manuel, do we have an idea on what the list of things is that we would like to see accomplished? And is there a price tag attached to those?
So I certainly appreciate the sentiment of this motion here, and it is very relevant to the delegations and stuff that we've been hearing about. Following the last delegation we had last week, I did have an opportunity to meet with them later that afternoon, and what my advice is that I believe there's an opportunity with the adjacent businesses in that neighborhood as a whole to come up with a community-based strategy as to improvements, some of them physical, some of them operating wise, and just community connectiveness. There's a variety of tasks that should be initiated to try to provide some relief in the area. And I think we have a lot of commitment to move that forward. The challenge to that is I don't necessarily think that the plan is well defined as of yet. It will have some cost implications, and certainly $50,000 would go a long way to implementing a number of those. I would just be careful about how specific we make that motion. I'd hate to say like $50,000 and people think that security cameras are going to be what's going to solve this, because it may not be. But I would like the opportunity to come back after having worked with the community groups in the private businesses to say, this is where we see the best value of investment, whether that's part of it's on physical securities, part of it's maybe on enhanced police and patrol, some of it's on this or that. So I think the flexibility of having some sort of community safety fund where council can approve projects that are essentially well thought out and presented would be beneficial. I would caution against getting too specific without any defined plan in front of you right now.
So, Mayor Given, I'd like to encourage my colleagues to defeat this motion and come back with a game plan from Protective and Social Services with consultation with the neighbors and with a more direct understanding of what we are actually going to do.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. There's a couple other folks in the queue. I'll just say that I won't support the motion because I think Council has enough financial flexibility within our Council Strategic Initiatives Fund. What we're talking about at this stage is modifying the 2020 budget. I think the 2020 budget has a number of opportunities for financial flexibility when administration is in a position to make recommendations to us on what needs to be done. If they came and said, X and Y and Z need to be done at a cost of X number of dollars. Council and we would recommend future expenditures reserve, financial stabilization reserve, or the council strategic initiatives. Those are all things that are currently budgeted for. I don't know that we need to amend the 2020 budget to give ourselves more flexibility. So I support the intent of the motion, and when administration has more details and comes forward, I will absolutely support the request. Subject to what it is, I suppose, but I don't think we need to amend our budget to provide more financial flexibility. We have a council strategic initiatives reserve that is not fully expended, that does actually provide us with a great measure of flexibility, and I think if there's stuff we need, administration can say, hey, we need this. You have this flexibility within the budget, council. I don't think we need to add any additional flexibility to 2020. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Pretty much the comments have been said. I agree that there may be some needs there until the amount is established. I'm not comfortable with earmarking money out of the funds that were from the funding source that was noted by Councillor Brescia, and I do agree that this is more of a strategic council priority initiative, so I won't support the motion. Thanks.
Councillor Clayton. I don't see anybody else in the queue, so I'll go to Councillor Bressie to close.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Just to speak to this, I appreciate that council's got ultimate flexibility with the budget, and council can definitely find money for this. For me, this is really more about I'd like to give administration flexibility with this money in terms of I think that administration is already working well with these landowners, and I trust administration to come up with solutions that are physical improvements that will be well worth taxpayers' money. I also expect them not to. I don't see administration spending money out of this fund if it's not actually going to make an impact. But I really have troubles picturing myself ever if administration came and made a request under $50,000 to do physical improvements in this area. I have troubles imagining a situation where I'd vote no against that, or council would say no against it. I think that by putting this in the budget, it allows administration just to go out and make those small improvements without having to come back to council. And the reason that's important is because this is going to be new use in the neighborhood. I think that issues are going to come up relatively quick. I think the decision-making loop of it taking weeks, if not months, for it to get to council, for council to ultimately probably rubber stamp what administration's probably going to recommend to us anyways, I don't think that decision-making loop is needed. So I'd encourage council to do this so that we can quickly respond and quickly work with our partners in the community as we're mitigating impacts.
Thanks for that close, Councillor Bressie. I'll call for the vote on Councillor Bressie's motion. Please vote. Okay. I just had one council member identify that they entered their vote incorrectly. I'll call for the... So we cancel that vote. Ask council members to vote again, please. Okay. Thank you. That motion does not carry. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. The motion I'm about to make is in large thanks to what CLT did with the green initiatives and allowing us to have the flexibility for me to be able to even entertain a motion like this. I think PBB is starting to show its work. I think we're going to continue to see its efforts. The one area, though, that I hear constantly in our community is around safety, and I hope it is going to address Councillor Bressie's previous motion here. So I'm going to make a motion that council approve $400,000 in funding for community safety initiatives, and that CLT will bring back a report by March 31st, 2020 of how they see those funds being spent. I want to give the flexibility back to CLT, who's presented this budget and done a lot of work on it, to also come back to us of how they're going to spend these funds. Whether this means more CMP, whether it means more community initiatives like Council Bressie spoke of, whether it means more support for CSD, whatever that means, I'm comfortable with that. I think the flexibility they gave us today over this budget deliberations has allowed us to be able to spend some money and invest back in our community. And again, community safety, I think, is important to all of us. So I'm really hoping you guys can get behind this and support it. I know $400,000 is a big jump, and it's coming kind of off the paper from where we were. But for me, it still can achieve some reserves, a nice tax rate, because we did cut the things that administration asked us to do. And so I think we have the ability to put some money back in and allowing CLT the flexibility to actually best position us of how they think this could be spent to help our community.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. I just want to confirm, so your motion probably need to identify if you mean that as operational funding or capital funding. They have substantially different impacts in terms of what administration might recommend in terms of, so what's your intent?
My intent for 2020 that it would be operational in case they come back with items that are going to have to stay operational in nature after that. If they come back and say some of these are one-time initiatives, this operation may not have to be the same amount in 2021. If they come back with safety grants, like Councillor Bressie was saying, we did some fencing, we did some things, and they spent $100,000 on those kind of things, maybe the operational impacts wouldn't be as big going forward. But I think to make it safe for the intent of my motion, I think it needs to come from operating.
Okay. Dr. Manuel.
And just to clarify, in years past, our safe growth matching grants, which businesses drew upon to do physical improvements on their sites, those actually did come from our operating funds. So although we can through our operating funds deliver grant programming for capital projects.
Sorry, Director Manuel. I was also hearing something on the side.
No, so what I was saying was in years past, one of the programs we heard was discontinued, but was popular in the past with private businesses and nonprofits, was our Safe Growth Matching Grant. Our Safe Growth Matching Grant was an operating budget line item in crime prevention. So even though it was operating from the municipal perspective, it could still lay out funds that were ultimately utilized for capital improvements at various businesses.
Thank you. Director Walker.
Hi, thank you, Mayor Given. Because this is an undefined kind of one-time allocation of funding, it may be better to include it as a capital project funded from one of the reserves, and then any ongoing operating impacts from that could be included in our annual operating budget process, because it may or may not be a grant program.
So yeah, so Councillor Platt, what's your intention or wish? A bit challenge. I think I understand the intent to say, hey, we did some good work in ensuring that the overall sort of burden and the size of the organization was within reason, and your intent, I think, is add back some more capacity with a specific focus on community safety. But I think administration's advice is, well, so is that something that we should carry forward every year from now on? And if so, then that becomes a part of the sort of tax base, or is this a, let's do that for 2020 because we have that capacity and we don't know what will happen? Like, you know, that will be subject to future council decision making for future years. Do you?
For me, I'm gonna trust the reason we have this ability is from administration. So I'm gonna trust if they feel that that is the right funding source, then I'm fine with that. Because I think inevitably what was going to happen is we were going to put this money into reserves anyways. So I'm fine if that's the funding source that CLT feels is the right funding source, then I'm fine with that. I'd amend. If I made the amendment specifically to operating, then I would be happy to amend it to say that it's for capital or appropriate funding source as defined by CLT.
Sure, with the appropriate funding source. So, so I think with that change, this would be something administration would have the flexibility built into the 2020 year. And for things that that may have an impact in future years, council would still have decision-making authority over those. We would likely see them in future budget years. But administration will have flexibility in 2020. I see Director Walker is still in the queue. Maybe that's from the previous request. Okay. Any discussion or debate? Councillor Clayton, if you want to get your microphone. There you go.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I like this idea. However, it's just a little too rich for my blood. I think that we've made some other taken some initiatives this budget process with putting general RCMP members, adding them to our force, and additional other things that I think will enhance the community safety. So I'd like to amend the motion to reflect $300,000. At $500,000, it's just a little too rich for me. Sorry, $4. So I'll amend it to $250 then. It's just a little bit too much based on the fact that it's very broad, and it's in other discussions we had, it's money that's potentially squirreling away without a plan, and I don't in principle approve that. So I'd like to amend the motion to reflect $250,000. Thank you.
Okay, so motion to amend to reflect $250,000. Councillor Clayton's amendment. Open for discussion on her amendment. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Clayton's amendment? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. So we're back to the main motion. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Mayor Given. I do like this, and I'd point out that when we look at our strategic plan, safety is one of our pillars, and safety talks about to provide residents a safe and comfortable living standard. And I really do believe that Grande Prairie is a very safe place to live, and it's getting safer. Every stat I've seen, all the objective information I have is Grande Prairie is a safe place to live. That being said, I'm talking to more and more and more people who don't feel it's a safe thing. I think that, and safety goes into having a comfortable life, which is part of our pillar. I think that I want our people to feel safe. I want them to know that this is a priority for council. I think this is an appropriate course of action. So please support this, council.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any other discussion or debate on Councillor Palat's motion? Seeing none, I'll go to Councillor Palat to close.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I appreciate the comments, Councillor Bressie, and I think I may have a reputation of somebody that doesn't like to spend money, so I hope you can appreciate that this, to me, is good use of community money, or I wouldn't be thrown out lightheartedly like that. So I really hope you support the 400,000, because I think
it's been amended to 250. Oh
yeah, right.
You actually voted for that.
All right, fair enough. Still should have been 400. I guess I'll leave it alone.
Okay. Hey, thanks very much. So Councillor Palat's motion as amended to approve $250,000 in 2020 for community safety initiatives. I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Thank you. Were there any other issues arising on that point around the... I'm not seeing anybody ring in. So we've reached the stage now, and I hesitate to say it, where there was an opportunity for an open agenda for other issues that council members may wish to raise. And I say that with the greatest trepidation possible. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I want to come back to the bypass, and
see, there were a couple of flagged items. Thank you very much. And so this was one of those flagged items. Just to be clear, Councillor Bressie isn't raising something that hasn't been discussed before. There was the Highway 43 operating funding and community group funding, the 10% reduction in future years that we want to have a discussion about, or maybe more information. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with the bypass then. And before I say make a motion, I'd like to circle back to Director Glavin, because it's been a long couple of days. I want to make 100% sure that I understand what's going on. My understanding is that we don't really know what the bypass is going to cost to operate. We need to get it to actually operate. We need to know that. But a rough estimate is it's going to cost about $750,000 a year to operate, not including capital improvements to it like rehab, but just to do the basic line painting, sweeping, all that. And my understanding is that as the budget is written right now, for the next couple, for 2020, the money to operate the bypass is coming out of the provincial grant we received for this. Is that understanding correct?
Dr. Glavin?
Thank you, Mayor Given. That's correct. And so we have money, we have $1 million allocated in 2019, our current year, 2020, 2021, and 2022. We're not anticipating to spend the full $1 million each year, but that's how it's currently allocated. The way management is managing those funds is that we've set up a separate program code for any of our operations on that section of highway, and we bill against that. So, you know, we might spend $500,000 this year, we might spend $800,000 next year, but we have $1 million essentially earmarked, but we bill against the general account each year.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can add a little bit of information about why 600 or 700,000. So to allocate that funding for operating, those numbers are coming from Alberta Transportation, historical costing for operating, depending the season, of course, summer and winter operations. Their expenditure was between 600 to 700,000 historically. So we consider 750 or so with a little bit of an increased standard. We have a higher standard compared with Alberta Transportation. That's the reason of the 750.
Councillor Bressie?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what motion I want to make and what I think I could get past you guys. So the motion I'm going to make is a council direct that $375,000 be allocated from the operational budgets towards bypass operations in 2020. And kind of the intent of this is that will have a tax impact. And what I'm hoping to get at is that we're not funding the full operations of this out of a grant, that we're funding at least half the operations of the projected operations out of our tax base. And I think that's appropriate because we got this bypass this year. It's going to have a long-term tax impact on our residents. I think it makes sense to start that tax impact now instead of having a big bump in future years. I'd hate to, in a few years, have to tell our residents, yeah, we're bumping your taxes to operate the bypass that we got a few years ago from now. I think it makes sense to at least wean ourselves onto there being a tax impact from this.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. So to be clear, this isn't increasing the amount administration has put in the budget for the assuming the operations of the, but it just making clear that the intent is that 375,000 should actually come from the tax base rather than from reserves of the grant that we have. Councillor Clayton.
And on that note, just to clarify to Director Glavin, of the over $10 million that's identified for road rehabilitation and overlay, it'll come from that. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mayor Given. The $375,000 that Councillor Bressie is suggesting is not a funding source that we have proposed. This would be an additional expense.
This would be on the operational side of the budget, so it would be a increase in the city's operation costs and would be a direct impact on the property tax rate.
So based on that, I won't support this motion. I think that council's been very strategic and aggressive in regards to the amount of money that's been put for road rehabilitation and overlay. Any of this sort of maintenance work, not substantial work, but maintenance work, that is, if the will of council is to not use the grant that we were given, should come out of that previously identified fund in my mind. In regards to the overall strategy, I can appreciate where Councillor Bressie's going to not use this grant money. But my concern would be is that we're sitting on this money then and taking money from our ratepayers when we have a funding source already previously identified, and the government gave us money for this purpose. And sure, there will be, I mean, we've heard numbers as high as $70 million to fully revitalize this this bypass. But at this time, until we have it in our system, we don't really know the amount of money. So the regular funding source that was identified from the province, in my opinion, is a good funding source. If we're not going to use that, I think that we need to take this $375,000 from the $10+ million that we have identified for road rehabilitation and overlay. So I won't support the motion.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I'll jump in and say I support Councillor Bressie's motion for the fact that we have more lane kilometers of road that we need to do street sweeping on, snow plowing on, and operational maintenance, which is not the same as road rehab and overlay, just regular operational maintenance, which some manner of pothole filling is just covered in our operational fund. The cost, we have more kilometers of road that we have to operate, and we need to accept that at some stage. That is an ongoing operational cost that we need to acclimatize the community to. And I actually appreciate the idea of not using all of our one-time funding to offset what are really operational costs. I think that one-time funding should go, the majority of it as much as possible, to making physical improvements that are longer lasting, things that are more of a one-time nature. So I appreciate the intent here, which is really to acclimatize our residents to the cost of operating this new infrastructure. The city's costs, ongoing costs, have increased, and it's reasonable that taxpayers share some of that cost, accept some of that cost now, and that we help use the one-time funds transition that in, rather than taxpayers having to accept all of that burden immediately. So I support the intent of the motion. I support the motion as it stands. Councillor Thiessen.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Given. I'm a bit of a different mindset than yourself. I agree with Councillor Bressie's motion, and I will vote in support of it. I'm actually a little surprised that we didn't just throw in the $750,000 as a whole. And the reason why is I get that we want to fit it into our budget and stuff like that, but that's still $375,000 that's going to chip away at the grant that we got. That's going to go for the basic road maintenance and repair. Traffic light systems got to be installed, sidewalks, crosswalks. It's constantly chipping down in a way at it. So that's over $1 million of upgrades that we're going to lose to operational funding. With the $750,000, on the other hand, we would have all that money available to fix and rehab the road. But I can get behind this motion now because I think you're trying to feel the temperature of council, and you don't want to to shock them with a almost $750,000 operational upgrade to our budget. So I can get behind this, even though I kind of wish you would have went for the full gamut and then tried a secondary motion. But I'll support this for now, and thank you for your thoughtfulness. The more money we have to put into that road, Jackie, you were right. The assessment of the road repairs is well over $70 million, and we got to bear that cost. Taxpayers do. So the sooner we can get that fixed up and upgraded, the better. And I don't want to be wasting money from that grant on operations when we could acclimatize it, and we can deal with that now. Administration's done a lot of hard work, and so has council, to bring the budget numbers down. So we're not going to see the big increase this year. So thank you for that, Councillor Bressie.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Will. Given. Just clarification, is that $1 million they're giving us next 3 years, is that an operating budget already, or that's on the side?
My understanding, Councillor Minhas, was that administration's recommendation was to take that fund from the $20 million reserve that came from the provincial government grant. So it was one-time funding. It was not on the operational side. Is that correct, Director Glavin?
No, I heard there's $1 million a year they're given for maintenance.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will clarify this. So Alberta Transportation provided $20 million in total as grant funding for the transfer of 13 kilometers of the bypass to city's jurisdiction. So we have $20 million without any strings attached in terms of how to use the money. Could be operating, could be capital improvements. So we decided to use a mix of capital improvements. I believe we have 5 million or so, 5.5 million allocated in capital for 2020, and about 750,000 for operating for 2020. This fund will continue being used to a point that will be depleted. And at that point, it will be a significant impact on the tax base, because we will need to continue performing operations and capital upgrades. We're talking 10 years probably plus, but that is the intent. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Minhas. Any other discussion or debate on Councillor Bressie's motion? I see none, so Councillor Bressie to close.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Given just two thoughts for council. One is this bypass is going to be a significant cost around our taxpayers' necks in the coming years, not just operationally, but also capital-wise. And if we don't start generating tax revenue to pay for it now, that's going to become an even bigger weight around our taxpayers' necks. I think a fundamental philosophy that we generally have in government is that the taxpayer should pay for the services they use when they use them. And that's something that this council's endorsed. That's why we take out debt for projects like downtown, so that people in the future who are enjoying those are using them. That's also why this council did debt refinancing, because we realized that today's taxpayers were paying for things that people in the future would use. Well, I think it goes the other direction too. I think that today's taxpayers are benefiting from the city operating this bypass, and today's taxpayers should pay for that. It's appropriate, it's fair. It also stops a much bigger burden being put on future taxpayers. So please support this motion.
Thanks for that close, Councillor Bressie. So I'll call for the vote on Councillor Bressie's motion to identify that $375,000 of funding for the operation of the bypass come from the city's operational fund. Please vote. Thank you. And that motion does carry. The other item that was raised, if there wasn't anything further on 43, the other item that was raised was community group funding and the proposed 10% reductions. I'm not remembering who raised that. It was Councillor Bressie as well? Okay. So maybe we can have that slide up if administration has that. And Councillor Bressie, you can just speak to what it was that you're looking to gain in terms of understanding.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Given having an off-the-cuff discussion, my understanding is that the strategy isn't actually built into the budget as we see so far. It's an idea that might get built into future budgets. Could I just get confirmation of that from administration?
Director Miller?
Thanks, Mayor Given. That's correct. It's not built in yet.
Yeah, so with in light of that, I think that's a strategy I'm not ultimately going to support, but since it's not actually reflected in our budget yet, I don't feel the need to discuss it today, although if others do, by all means.
So, yeah, so to be clear, council isn't deciding on this. This was administration's information about intent for future budget discussions and implications. And so, yeah, Director Miller?
Thanks, Mayor Given. And at this stage, we're still gathering information from comparable communities, and our plan was to bring it forward in about 2 months.
Okay, so then with that understanding, that item is off of our flagged list. So we are through our flagged items, I believe. And so are there any other items that council want to discuss before we move on to approving the 2020-2021 budget? Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I have a couple items, so I will, if you just give me a second here. Yesterday we had some lengthy discussions on things that we cut from the capital plan in regards to the Revolution Place. There's one I'd like to actually two I want to revisit, and two, as I mentioned yesterday, I'd like to bring forward as additional priorities. The first one I'm going to bring forward is for no technical name, is what would be considered a theater drape. The facility, as you know, often hosts large concerts in the hockey arena aside the Canada Games arena. And with that process, many of the entertainers request a theater drape to basically block the back of house. That piece of equipment is something that the facility doesn't currently own. It's something that they quite often have to rent. Over a course of a year, the facility can spend $15,000 to $30,000 in rentals of this. And there are some artists that refuse to come to our facility because we don't have this. In turn, having some discussions and looking into this, the piece of equipment is actually only $50,000. So it would be easily cost recovered in what could equate to 2 years of concerts. But in turn, it makes our facility more appealing to certain acts that won't rent our facility because we don't have it. So I'd like to make a motion that council support in the 2020 year the amount of $50,000, up to an amount of $50,000 for the purchase of this theater drape.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Clayton. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just a question for administration on the rental side. I just want to confirm, or if administration knows what we are spending, I guess, on rental a year currently to do this.
Director Miller.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I don't have the rental information, but I did confirm that this was discussed in the past with administration at Red Place, and it was the $50,000 that Councillor Clayton has mentioned. I can try to get the rental information, but I have no reason to disbelieve what was just presented. I know Councillor Clayton has had discussions with staff as well, so that's probably the figure that was provided to her.
Thanks for that. I guess if we're going off of that, I will be supporting this motion. I think it's a good use of capital when we can get our money back within 3 to 4 years on it and potentially look at other acts that may be coming to Grande Prairie. I think that's a good use of money for capital. So I will be supporting it.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. A question for administration with respect to sort of the operation of a drape. Is it something that just hangs there, or is it something that requires storage? And if so, do we have storage for that? And this is the challenge with specific issues like this. There are a whole bunch of questions that I don't know whether or not they've been vetted by administration. Dr. Miller?
Mayor Given, recently I did have a conversation with Catherine, who's our acting GM, when we had the last big event in town, and she did bring up the drape, and it's certainly doable to have a drape. I don't know if it gets hung each time or if it gets pulled to the sides, but she did say it would be advantageous to have it. So,
was this anything that was brought forward by the department and rejected by CLT in terms of the operational budget or capital budget?
Not to my recollection. It has never been brought forward to that level, I think.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dr. Miller. Any other discussion or debate, questions or comments on Councillor Clayton's motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. That motion does carry. Councillor Clayton, you had other items?
Yesterday, there was a motion in regards to the box office and lobby revitalization. The motion that was passed had an amount of $25,000 being funded for box office and lobby upgrades. And if I recall the wording correctly, Councillor Plott specifically earmarked this money for accessibility at the ticket office, at the box office. I would like to make a motion that this item be funded from council strategic priority. There's a specific line in the in the initiatives for accessibility, and I would like to identify that this item be funded from there. Thank you.
So funding source on an item that a $20,000 item that council approved yesterday. Okay. Open for discussion debate. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm going to speak very strongly against this, and I hope council will defeat this. And as the guy that I believe made the motion to get that accessibility initiatives funded through the council strategic priorities reserve, my understanding of that is that that earlier in the term, administration undertook an accessibility audit of all city facilities to figure out where do our city facilities have issues with accessibility challenges. And what this money in our capital budget, and we've set aside money every year to address the list of deficiencies that they've found. And at least that's my understanding, that's my recollection of what this is without having time to prepare. I don't see why this one should be jumping the list of all the other deficiencies that our administration has found. So I think that that wasn't something in our strategic priorities initiatives that I think we set aside saying, hey, we might use this in the future. I'm pretty sure we gave that a very specific use, and I don't support changing that specific use without more information.
Councillor Bressie, can I ask, so in our budget package, there's a line item in page 18 that actually specifically says accessibility initiatives capital tax $50,000 per year for the term of the, for the foreseeable future. Can administration, so what is the relationship between the accessibility initiatives and council's strategic initiatives fund and this line item in our budget? Is our strategic initiatives the funding source for this line item? Is this line item in addition to the funding contemplated in our strategic initiatives?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So this item is, in fact, in addition to Council's strategic initiatives fund allocation, and was meant to address items that are identified through the Facility Condition Index report, which would be kind of larger accessibility concerns.
So with that information, I will support Councillor Clayton's motion. My concern was that would really get to where Councillor Bressie was saying, that we were jumping the queue of these things that have been vetted and prioritized. I'm comfortable that we do have the ability to handle those larger items that have been viewed by administration. And I think this is, by definition, if council wishes to make it a priority, then it's appropriate that it's funded out of council strategic priorities initiative. That makes sense to me, and I can support that. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just a question to administration along that same thing. Out of that $50,000 accessibility fund, can you tell me what needs are identified that we haven't achieved yet, or what we see being, are we going to be short funding, I guess, with our accessibility fund, the $50,000 fund, not the council one, but the $50,000 fund that we're annually doing?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I don't have that information at hand at this moment. I could endeavor to get that. And there was an audit done this year or 2 years ago, and small items were addressed. I do know that. I think there's one item on that small item list that hasn't been taken care of, but I don't have a list of projects that would be included in.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I just
Councillor Plott?
Another question, I guess, process question on this. So we're looking for a funding source. If we end up finding that in 2020 that we don't use the accessibility fund at all, could this be reallocated? Could this $25,000 be put back into council strategic and put towards this accessibility fund? I guess some reason I'm asking this is I think we had a really good conversation originally about making sure we put money in our budget to make sure we dealt with accessibility. But again, I don't want to see a fund that just sits there and brews along at $50,000 a year if we're not using it. So if it doesn't get used in 2020, could we have the ability in 2020 to actually reverse taking the funding source from our strategic, and if this passes over to capital?
Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. The short answer is yes, council can do whatever it wants with either the capital plan or the operating plan. It's, I would say, a bit premature to give you a definitive answer, but should there be funding remaining, we certainly would either put it back in the pool to fund other things, or council could direct management to put it back into council's strategic initiative accessibility allocation.
Okay, thank you for that. So with all that said, I guess, and I appreciate that, I will support the motion. I think it's a good use of that fund. That's what it was set up for. And look forward to maybe a year from now seeing how we're using that accessibility fund that we put forward. So I think for now it's an excellent spot to use this funding. Appreciate the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. So I'm a bit unclear on how is administration using in council strategic initiatives. There's a pool of money that is defined for accessibility initiatives. How's administration using that today? How would administration propose to use that in 2020? Or, I guess, and council, the reason that I ask this is maybe we should just say add that to the budget so that there is 200,000 in 2020 for accessibility initiatives, or 100,000 each year. Like, I don't know why it's sitting in our strategic initiatives fund for undefined use when we could just say do more over the course of the next 2 years and use this money to do it. Like, can somebody tell me what's happening with that money today? If council takes no other action, what will happen in 2020 with our strategic initiatives accessibility fund?
Should there be no large projects coming forward through the Facility Condition Index report identifying larger accessibility concerns, we would come forward with a recommendation to redeploy that funding, or so we'll spend the money that's in the capital plan identified first, and then we would look to that accessibility fund in council strategic initiatives.
Okay. So council, I think I appreciate the intent. I think the strategic initiatives fund is a bit of an unusual thing. I appreciate administration giving us that flexibility. If council said that we wanted to have 230,000, whatever the amount is left there in the accessibility side, then maybe we should just directly inject that into the capital plan over the course of the next 2 years and tell administration to go and do a bunch of work, rather than having it sit aside in an undefined amount and administration knowing, do we work within the envelope of $50,000 or do we have the full? So I would love to see somebody make a motion to direct that amount that's in the strategic initiatives into the capital plan. And if it, even for 2020, and if it carried over to 2021, then that's fine, but we've directed it right into the capital plan. Administration has full latitude to go out and start doing projects rather than it being in this weird, undefined space. Councillor Ressi?
Sorry, yeah, we need to do something with this, because my recollection is this was meant to fund that $50,000 a year, which was unfunded in our capital budget last year. And even looking at minutes right now and looking at our capital budget from last year, that's reinforcing my recollection of that.
So, Councillor Clayton, we don't want to lose your motion. While Councillor Clayton makes her comment, can somebody just refresh me of how much is left in that accessibility stream within council's strategic initiatives? Councillor. Sorry, I'm seeing that the answer to that's 196,562. So if there was a motion to include the 196,562 less Councillor Clayton's motion into the 2020 capital budget, that's the kind of thing that would just get it into administration's hands to go and do stuff.
Well, I guess to that comment, right now with the $200,000 earmarked in council's initiatives, my understanding of that fund is that it's initiatives that we really want to do ourselves, not recommendations from what some report brings forward. I thought they were two different buckets of money. Ones that administration is going to do based on assessment of needs, and ones that we earmarked that, we are thinking are important to what we're hearing on the street. So I thought they were two different buckets.
And you know, a council member asked what's happened with that fund over the course of last year, and the answer was that at this community social development, at the CSD building, they put a new wheelchair compliant washroom. There was an accessibility ramp in the HR area of City on 99. None of these things came to council. None of these things where council said, hey, this is a hot
They
priority.
got billed to us, per se.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think council is, we make decisions at budget time. We don't go through a process of, and you know, we've delegated a lot of authority to administration over the years, which is appropriate. And so I don't know why that, I think this fund isn't getting used the way council wanted it to make improvements in the community, because we've kind of kept it to ourselves, either probably inadvertently. So I think if the intent of that $200,000, now 196,562, was to do this kind of stuff in the community, we should just give administration that authority to go and do it. And I don't think that that's different than what Councillor Clayton's motion is. I think we can do your motion and then a follow-up motion to say, and the balance be injected into the 2020 capital plan. Councillor, sorry, anybody else on Councillor Clayton's motion? Councillor Bressie and then Councillor Clayton to close.
I'm actually contemplating moving that we take a recess because I think there's confusion here, but yeah, I'll leave it.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Bressie, the view on screen of your head going. Councillor Clayton to close on your motion.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just quickly, the big thing for me on this is that if we're not utilizing the money, then let's find some things to utilize the money. It's money sitting there, and this is something that council approved to do, and it's an accessibility issue, so let's put it where it should be, as opposed to taking capital tax for it. So that's the intent of this, and so I hope you support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. That was a close on Councillor Clayton's motion to reflect the change of that source of the motion that was approved yesterday to be from the Council Strategic Initiatives Fund. Please vote. That motion does carry. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'd make a motion that we move all remaining funds left in our council initiative to
accessibility initiative
to, I guess we just put it to capital.
To the 2020 capital budget.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that I think would fill out a tent of giving that money into the capital budget. Administration has the ability then to go and speed up the projects that they may have spread out over multiple years, or do larger projects they may not have been able to do in a single year. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor Bressie.
Be crystal clear, this would still all be spent on accessibility initiatives. Just sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And so my understanding would be then the change to the budget would be that the 2020 year on page 18 would show $50,000 from capital tax for accessibility initiatives, and then the balance as another line item that would say council strategic initiatives, and administration would have the ability, or whatever maybe would call it something else, but that's the intent, is that we haven't changed the $50,000 that was coming from capital tax. We're saying the money that was sitting around in reserve that we had some control over, put it in the capital plan and use that as well. Okay, Councillor Bressie.
Sorry, I still think there's been a mix-up somewhere, so I'm just make sure all my bases are covered. I'm happy because I think we just found an extra $200,000 for accessibility initiatives. Is what I think just happened. But I'd like to refer council administration to page 18 of our capital plan. So page 18 of our budget package. Right at the top, corporate facility management, under accessibility initiatives, there's $50,000 budgeted per year. This motion would not change that, correct? We've spent extra money this year, and we still have $50,000.
We have, from the funds that was sort of exclusively council's domain, we've injected those funds fully into the capital plan. If they weren't expended in 2020, they would carry over. But it does give administration that ability to attack the plans and priorities that they had laid out from corporate facilities management sooner. It is in addition to the $50,000 in capital tax. I think that's okay. Any other discussion or debate on that motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Okay. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I have two more. I'm just reading the crowd here, best on what I do next. Okay, I'm first item I want to address. After getting some additional information on item under events and entertainment, the concession upgrade, there was a capital tax. Pretty sure I put forward a motion that was passed to move $50,000 from capital tax concession upgrade to the 2021 budget from the 2020 budget. I was able to get additional information, and I would like to say that I was wrong, and that there are more emergent needs in this upgrade than I was originally aware of. After discussing with Director Arlen Miller, he identified that this actually is a need for 2020. And one thing that I did learn through getting additional information is through these upgrades, we can actually get more people through the concession, in turn, which means we make more money. The more money the concession makes, the more money we make. So these, we did agree to move these to 2021. However, after additional information, I think that it's more emergent that these get moved back to the 2020 budget. So I would move the council amend the capital tax, or the concession upgrade, which is funded through capital tax, to the 2020 budget.
Thanks very much, Councillor Clayton. Appreciate you acknowledging that additional information helped your thought process on that. Now it's up for council to decide whether they agreed with your previous argument or your current one. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I'm going to support it mostly just because she admitted she was wrong.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. I will also say that this is a good reason why council changes administration's recommend. This is a good reason why council changes puts their view on the relative priorities in place of admissions at our own risk. Administration has a significant amount of information on that, and so I support this returning to administration's recommendation. I don't see anybody else in the queue on Councillor Clayton's motion. Please vote. That motion carries. Councillor Clayton, you had something else?
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. Last item today, keeping with the theme of Revolution Place, I want to share some information in regards to another capital purchase. Currently, right now, the Revolution facility has approximately 1,800 chairs. On a sold-out concert, they would use, in most cases, 1,400 chairs. These chairs are extremely old, and there's on record multiple circumstances of through social media avenues, through voicemails, through emails, of people really complaining about the shape of these chairs. I know last term council talked about this capital purchase, and it is fairly substantial, so I do have some options for council to consider. But something to keep in mind in the replacement of these chairs is that although you may think we don't have a lot of competition when it comes to concerts, we actually have a very competitive player about 127 kilometers down the road who books significant concerts and in turn not only takes away money from our facility, they take away money from our retailers, from our hospitality vendors, and from numerous gas stations, etc. So when we allow consumers to leave our marketplace to spend their money somewhere else, it's a substantial loss to our community. The chairs are about 120, the chairs to replace the request is $120,000. And so what I would like to suggest that this gets split into 2 years, and I'll make a motion here in a minute, but first I'll make the motion, sorry. So I would move that council support through capital tax funding the acquisition of half the required chairs, funded $60,000 in 2020 and $60,000 in 2022. Speaking to this motion, through additional information, I learned that there's an opportunity for the facility to get some cost recovery on splitting the chairs into a purchase this way, because just as when you go to the theater and you can book a premium seat, you can do that at concert venues as well. There are times that our patrons sit 3 to 4 hours, depending on the the concert or the entertainment source, and these chairs at a premium would have some revenue back to them, and the facility feels that over a 2-year period, if they could replace half of them now and half of them in 2 years, that it would help them be a lot more competitive in the marketplace. So I encourage council to support the $60,000 for 2020 and $60,000 for 2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. So motion to add 60,000 to the 2020 and 2021 capital budgets for 21 and 22, Councillor Clayton? 2020 and 22. Oh, okay. 2020 and 2022 capital budgets for the replacements of the Revolution Place concert chairs. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I just want to confirm that these aren't the bleacher seats. These are the on-the-floor seats. The locking ones. Yeah, I support this.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Director of Community Services.
Thanks, Mayor Given. And I just wanted to provide a little bit more information. Typically, it's a 10-year lifespan for the chairs, and ours are 1995 vintage. Well, we could to the museum, perhaps.
No, actually, if I can comment on that, I was told by administration at the facility that there is an opportunity to get some money for them. In smaller venues, they would take, a lump of maybe 500 chairs and they would give us some money for them. Not substantial, but yeah, there is a little bit of an opportunity there.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Pressy.
Thank you, Councillor Clayton. Honestly, I'm struggling with this one, and I struggled with the Curtin one too in terms of. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. It seems it might make sense, but I actually am very uncomfortable with the process of this in terms of I don't see it as an emerging need, and I don't know if I love this coming to council instead of being vetted by CLT and being at the recommendation of our professional management team. So I'm struggling with it because you make a good case, but I don't know if it's been properly vetted through other strategic needs in our capital budget.
Thanks, Councillor Bressy. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I share your hesitation, Councillor Bressy, but I'm going to support this motion. As a former show promoter and somebody who sat in those chairs and somebody who was there for the Remembrance Day ceremonies this past weekend, I actually talked with several people. Usually takes you about 2 hours to get out after the ceremony ends, but I heard several complaints about how hard it was on people to sit in those chairs for 3-4 hours. I also see it as an extra revenue opportunity. I know that Councillor Clayton said, well, we can trade in some of our old chairs, but heck, if we're going to spread it out for a $60,000 purchase for the first 2 years, I guess, which we'll do this year, and then we will wait those 2 years till we make another $60,000 investment for the other half of those chairs, that means we're essentially providing premium seats. And at premium seats, you might be able to charge $1 or $2 extra and create extra revenue because now you got the soft, cushy seats closer to the stage. So it's an opportunity that I hope our facility people at Revolution Place don't overlook. And because Councillor Clayton has mentioned, I'm reiterating it. By all means, this is an opportunity, and you'll definitely see the difference between the good seats and the bad seats. So for all those reasons, I'll support this, and largely because it's split out over the course of several years. So.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Bill Mayor Given. Yes, I will support it because I heard the same comments what Chris said. I also heard about the sound system in the hockey side. That was so bad. People couldn't stay there. That's the reason people don't come for the concert and stuff, because our sound system is so poor there. Need to be upgraded. That too. So I'll support it, yeah, Keith.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Minhas. I don't see anybody else in the queue to speak. Then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. Were those all the additional items?
That's everything for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Were there any other additional items that Council wished to discuss? I do have one that I want to raise for administration. We have on our council strategic initiatives the selective demolition for the leisure center. I agree that that needs to be reflected in the plan. Is there a way, how do we, that's not going to happen for a number of years. Is this the appropriate use of council strategic initiatives fund, I guess? I just want a bit of a discussion about that. I'm struggling a bit because I don't have a sense that that's going to happen until 2023, realistically. I think if it's 2022 occupation of the new school, which we'll see how that actually goes, but it's not likely that's going to happen until 2023. And so I'm a bit challenged of whether we keep those funds here or if there are other purposes that could be better, that they could be better put to in the community, or we keep them in reserve until 2023 so the next council doesn't have to deal with it. So can administration sort of speak to the treatment of those in our budget? Are they're sitting there, and so that project is fully funded when it comes up in 2023? And if so, could we, I guess at minimum, reflect it in the 2023 year and remove it from the council? I'm just a bit uncomfortable because it looks like it's sitting there unexpended. Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So yes, it is identified as an initiative under Council's Strategic Initiative Fund. And yes, it would, because it's earmarked, it would stay there. We can absolutely move it into the capital plan into the 2023 year and remove it from the list of funding, or we could do something different. At the time that the Council Strategic Initiative Fund was established, if you'll recall, there was $3 million allocated over the 4 years for Council to accommodate any emerging issues that they saw that hadn't been accommodated in the capital plan. But we certainly can move those funds.
I guess I just, if council has committed that amount to that project, then I think it needs to be basically out of our hands. It's just done, and we don't get a chance to reconsider that. And I appreciate that the slide that administration showed really that there's only 538 remaining. But I think that we just need to be clear that that's going to happen in that future year. It's not going to show up in 2020. It's not going to show. It shouldn't repeat in whatever the current year is. It should just be clear that those funds are set aside for 2023 when they're needed. So I don't know if there's a motion needed with respect to that, to amending the capital plan to reflect it, or how we deal with that. But I've felt uncomfortable with it. Dr. Walker, is there a better way to deal with that, or something that you need from council to formally to deal with that?
Thanks, Mayor Given. No, we can absolutely move that. The reason it was left on the list was so that council had a running total of the decisions that they had made. So certainly we can set up a capital plan and transfer that funding.
Okay, great. That handles my concern around that. I don't see anything else. I heard from our city manager then we could have about a 10-minute recess or so for our finance team to be able to put together the implications or the impacts of all of our decisions cumulatively. Council would have a chance to see that. We will have likely a discussion about the disposition of funds between the reserve and property tax rate. We'll have that discussion after administration sort of is able to do up the totals. Then once we conclude that discussion, we would need a motion to approve the budget for 2020, and then a motion to refer that budget to council for approval next Monday. So we'll take about a 10-minute break for administration to put together those numbers. as I clean my glasses on screen. Now that we have a clear-minded perspective, we'll look to our Corporate Services Director for some information about the implication of all of our decisions. Susan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. So management's recommendation is a tax impact of 1.51%. This would allow us to see a reserve transfer of 1.8 million. This represents $45.67 impact to the average residence, and for 2020.
Okay. So administration's recommendation is that at the accumulation of all the decisions council made, that the property tax implication would be as you heard, and their suggestion is that council approve the transfer of $1.8 million to the Financial Stabilization Reserve. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. Again, I appreciate all the work that's been done by administration to get to this point to we even have this option to have a conversation around 1.5%. I'm just going to go back to when budgets started and remind us just kind of, how we were set up with economic forecasting. And so Wood Gandhi's comments were, most of our numbers are still going down, but we're driving the bus, but it's still going slow. So numbers aren't going great, but we're moving forward. That the bank's probably going to cut interest rates, mostly to help stimulate the economy. That the provincial budget is talking about how we're going to increase corporate tax incentives to help stimulate the economy. And I believe, as much as it might only be dollars difference, a lower tax rate makes a big difference on economic development, and it bridges the gap between us and the county. So I'm going to propose that we go to a 0.75% tax increase. I believe this would still transfer about $900,000 into reserves, and I can ask for clarification on that from our corporate team there. But I want to remind council, we already have 1.6 million allocated to reserves. We're forecasting about a $300,000 overture this year, which through the hard work of our CLT to complete that. So we'd be putting, in essence, about $2.8 million in reserves with that number. And I'll ask CLT to confirm that. But I think 0.75 is a real number. We went minus 4.1. This is starting to trend up. We're probably going to be in that 2.5 range next year. But I think right now, of all times, with all the uncertainty in the economy, I think this is the right time for us to do it. We still are putting money away. We've stabilized expenses. And now more than ever, I think we have to help the households of Grande Prairie. And I know it might not seem like a lot of money to them, but that's $1 million that we're not putting in our reserves. That's $1 million we're putting back in our community. So I'm really urging council to really consider a 0.75% tax increase, and reminding us that our neighbors will probably be a little bit higher than that. And every year we do this, we narrow the gap and we make our economic development look much better than the counties.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Plott. So a motion that Council Director Administration administer the budget to achieve a 0.75 property tax increase by reducing the amount transferred to reserves. Is that the right? That's the intent of the motion. I'll just make sure that that's framed properly. Or is Mr. City Manager, do you have a question or?
Yes, probably we'll need a few minutes to recalculate the numbers. Just wanted to give you a heads up about the future year impacts as well. I think that has to be considered when 2020 base is adjusted. There is impact on 2021 as well. So just to have a comprehensive explanation from finance about the future year as well.
Sure. So if administration can give us a recommendation on the effect of achieving that tax rate, what it would mean for transfer to reserves, and for an impact on the 2021 year. Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So that would reduce the transfer to reserve to $1 million from 1.8 million. It would increase 2021 tax impact to 4.4%.
And At a 1.51 tax increase, what is the 2021 year?
The 2021 year is sitting at 3.6.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Couple things. Last year, or since elective, we have put $2.5 million into reserves. Based on this motion on the floor, we would be putting $2.6 million. If we continue not even adding to our reserves, next year we'll put another 1.6, and the next year we'll put a 1.6. I think that this council has done their part in regards to putting money into reserves. We absolutely need to be prepared for things such as Councillor Bressy's concern of RCMP, and we need to be worried about the capital impact of the Highway 40, the bypass acquisition. However, there's only a reasonable amount, in my opinion, that we can continue to put into reserves for what ifs. We don't know the impact of the RCMP fund yet. We assume it's substantial. It will be in 2021. But if we put in a reasonable amount each year, I think that that's what's fair to our residents and our taxpayers. Over the course of the term, we saw some of the surrounding municipalities increase their taxes. Last year, we reduced ours significantly. If we can be below 1% this term, the spread gets bigger. And although we want to talk that we're not going into this strictly for a competitive nature, the reality of it is when people are buying houses, investing in our community, choosing where to live, where to open their businesses, the tax rate is a major decision. When somebody's buying a $500,000 house, and the tax rate in one municipality compared to the other is a major decision maker. If we want to continue to increase our new housing starts and to continue to attract retail and investment, we need to be competitive. It's the reality of it. And this tax rate is substantially important in that decision making. I appreciate the motion. It's a little bit aggressive, but I tell you, Council, we got to be 1% or lower. We need to continue on the path of being the leader in what's setting the tax rate and being competitive in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I'm going to oppose this motion, and largely because we have a reserve policy, and we were actually quite informed throughout the year, throughout last budget, about the depletion of our reserves, that it's not a sustainable number that could keep our city afloat in case anything happens. I think there's a comfortable number that we have to get to, and administration clearly recommended that we try not to skimp on the amount that goes into reserves. We don't have to overindulge, but I want to remind Councillors Platt and Clayton and anybody else who's willing to support this motion that Council came out with a very direct statement that we want to be plus or minus 1% on the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation right now is projected to be at 2%. It could be higher. It might be a little bit lower. But one thing we were clear before we started this process is that we all felt like 1.5 was an achievable and good number that would also replenish our reserves. So I don't want to change course at this point because we've done a lot of hard work. I actually might have changed my vote on a lot of the extras that we talked about in the open session if I knew that we were going to do this course after achieving 1.5. Now, if this was a reduction because we were at 2.25, I might be able to get behind that. But I think we've achieved our goals. We were pretty transparent through the whole process, and we achieved our goals, and we should be proud of that as a whole. Our administration did a lot of work. Council's done a lot of work. And I want to commend everybody for the efforts that we put into this process, and I don't want to disadvantage our organization, our corporation, and our community simply for 1 year of a tax reprieve. We want to keep doing this hard work. We're going to be back at it again next year to reduce this further. If we reduce it now, we're going to have even more work and even harder cuts to make next year. So I'd urge Council to please defeat this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Bressie.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Given. I'd like to remind Councillor Clayton and the rest of Council that Council actually drew $3.1 million out of reserves this year in order to support our debt refinancing. And this isn't just, and we don't just have to grow our reserves because they're lower than is considered best practice and they're lower than comparative municipalities. We also need to stop up our reserves because we need to pay them back for a decision that we made this term in order to deliver a tax decrease last year. I think that I am concerned by our low reserve levels. They're lower than is recommended. I know that this year we saw impacts from the federal provincial governments worth over $4 million, worth a 4% property tax increase. We know that we're going to see a similar impact from the federal government within the next year or two due to RCMP unionization, collective bargaining. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another large impact from the provincial budget that's going to be coming out in April. That could be an impact that could impact us in 2021. This government has also shown that it's not afraid to impact us mid-fiscal year. So I think that there's significant risks that are unique to our times, as well as all the other risks that municipalities usually shape. So my personal feeling is we should be topping up reserves. I think something else. I think that you've also talked about what's the story of Grande Prairie and what's the story of where this corporation's headed. I think that saying that many municipalities in Alberta are going to be either slashing services or having a much above inflationary change to cope with changes in the provincial budget. For us to say, hey, we didn't make any substantial cuts to city services and we still only made an inflationary increase, I think that actually is us leading the way in Alberta. I also think that my concern is I want to tell a long-term story of keeping taxes reasonable and getting them down. And for me, that means that that's keeping capacity to do that in future years as we have gotten the reserves to where they are. So I hope that council will keep the tax rate where it is at the administration recommended amount of 1.51%.
Thanks, Councillor Russi. Councillor, before I go to Councillor Friesen, I see the Corporate Services Director. I don't know if there's additional information. Susan?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So my scribbly little calculation in figuring out what year 2 impact would be. So 2021 would see a 4.8% tax increase without a reserve transfer beyond the 1.6 that is associated with the debt restructuring.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Friesen was next in the queue.
Thank you. I don't mind a 1.5% tax increase, but I would encourage council to think a little leaner even than that. Not convinced that 0.75 is quite the right number either. But here's the thing. Last year we heard a lot of the same kind of sentiments as Councillor Thiessen just shared, that, you know, here we are mortgaging the future for what, a 1-year tax reprieve. And we heard the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And you know what? The sky didn't fall. We heard that there would be an enormous rebound this year, but we've had administration work very hard this year, and they have avoided that enormous rebound with some very reasonable reductions that we have agreed to. And as the process of priority-based budgeting and the lean initiatives that are happening in the city, I think we've got still a couple more years where we can continue to bring our expenses down. And I think we need to take advantage of that when we can, and now's the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. I'll just say that I won't support the motion. I am also comfortable with a 1.51% increase. It being at or below the rate of inflation, I think, is a very positive approach. I would remind council that when we came in, before we got involved in any of the decisions and the recommendations from administration, they brought forward a recommendation that saw the city overall complement reduced by 31 positions. And at least a part of that was driven by the need to absorb the impact from the decisions we made last year. And so council said, hey, we only want to be at, plus or minus 1% of inflation. And administration said, well, to achieve that, you're going to have to cut these things because of the low rate last year and the reduction last year. So to say that the sky didn't fall, no, our management absolutely didn't characterize it, to their credit, that the sky was falling. They are professional and consistent, and they delivered us an actionable budget. But it is mistaken to suggest that the decisions last year didn't have an impact on this year's budget and the decisions that we saw in front of us. I think that those were the right decisions in the past. And obviously, council makes the decisions that we make collectively. I would encourage council to take a reasonable approach to the 2020 year. The 1.51 is reasonable. The Adding the reserve funds are not our reserves. It's not as though we're building up city council's, war chest. These are the community's reserves so that we can continue to ensure that community services are delivered at an affordable rate into the future. That's what those reserves are for. And it is a responsible decision to replenish those in a reasonable manner. I think if I'm looking at my little plastic chart that administration gave us at the start of this, the proposal that they came in at would have delivered a 1.5% tax increase and $2.3 million to reserve. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily all that much better off after all the discussions that we've had than what administration brought in. I, for one, am not comfortable with the motion, and I won't be supporting it. Councillor Plott, I see you in the queue. Do you want to enter in the debate, or do you want to close debate? Yeah, Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. This debate's about financial reserves to me, and so we had an opportunity when we got our council packages, and I think I was one of the keeners that was in right away trying to ask my questions about it. One of the questions I asked was, what was the financial reserves when we were elected? It was at 7.2. It's currently at 8.7. So we have put $1.5 million into Councillor Bresley's point. Even though we took money out, we have already put $1.5 million in. I also took the liberty of taking calculations that if the organization grew at 3%, and all we did was put back $1.6 million like we're already mandated and nothing further, within 5 years we'd be getting close to our 2-month maximum. And so I just want to remind this council that this council doesn't have to fix every problem. To me, I think we're addressing the big one. We're addressing getting our expenses. When I think we put the pressure on the organization last year, they've responded amazingly. To Councillor Friesen's point, I think PBB is going to still see more things coming next year. But I don't think it's all on us to try to drive up reserves all in our term. I think this is a collective. We have to understand this is a goal that we have to reach together. But to Councillor Bresley's thing, you may have concerns about where our reserves are at. Our policy says 5%, which would mean 5.8 million. We're at 8.7 now. So we're 3 million above what our policy says on a minimum level. So we're not in a threshold of danger. We're near the bottom, but this would put another almost $3 million into that as well. So I think we need to be careful on how much we're trying to put into reserves. I appreciate that it's an important conversation, but right now, our CLT is going to have some terrible conversations to have to make the next year with what we've approved. And there's not going to be some fun conversations coming up with some of the things that we've done. And our homeowners are all wondering what's going to happen with our taxes. I think us letting the homeowners put it back in their pocket instead of reserves, unless we need it for reserves, isn't a good time to put it in. And so I want you to really think about how important reserves are, because this conversation is more about reserves than it is about anything right now. The tax rate can be impacted last year. To Councillor Friesen's point, we heard that last year. We were supposed to have a 5.5% tax increase this year, and somehow we're throwing out a 0.75 that we'd still be putting money in reserves. So I caution you about putting a bunch of fear into next year's budget that hasn't happened yet. We should be dealing and addressing with what's in front of us today.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I know since we started on this council got elected, we've done a really good job of cutting and providing the city with the services as we have in the past. Administration has done its very hardest work to try and make things work and keep us in track. They asked us at retreat, they've asked us since retreat, what would you feel comfortable with as a tax increase? And that number, if I remember, was around 1.5% that majority of council members were quite happy with. We're at that, and there's a lot of things that green page really affected the city staff and let's just not say services, but we've made some changes that are drastic. Some are going to be good, some maybe not. And I'm willing to support what administration has suggested and what we've come up with as a team at the 1.51. I am not willing to go any lower at that, because next year we will probably find some more efficiencies and then we can continue that trend. But at this point in time, I'm more worried about next year as well as this year. And I think that if we keep this priority-based budgeting intact, which we've been doing a great job, and with the culture of staff, we have made a significant change in this business of the city. And I would suggest that council members not vote for this particular motion and follow administration's original ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Bill Mayor Given. I also stuck with the administration what they put the proposal because of all year we are preaching we're going to go 1.5. We're going to stay under the inflation or close to the inflation, and they come out with very hard working and respectful working and being a trust between the council and them. I don't want to go away with it. 1.5 is reasonable, which is we are stuck with it, and I will stay with the 1.5. And everything said at the debate, I respect with Wade what he's saying. I probably agree with a lot point on that issue, but be committed to 1.5 and we ask administration to do it there. They did it, so I don't want to bring their reputation down too, because they work hard, and next year we will find more. I think we might go only 1% or 1.5% again next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Minhas. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'd like to amend this motion, and the thought here isn't for this process to go on and dicker around with numbers, but there's a message here, in my opinion. Council and administration have worked very hard to get to this 1.5, and I truly appreciate the intent and all the hard work that administration and council have done to get to this. There are implications, and there are fairly substantial impacts. We've also done some great things in the last couple of days, and there's some work that we need to be proud of. And so to get to a number that sets a tone, and we haven't really had a ton of growing pains. There's nobody major services being cut. There's no major departments being cut. And we've added some things to this budget. I think that in a number, but the biggest part for me is the amount we're putting into reserves, money that we're putting aside for the what ifs. And I know there's some things down the road, but I don't have a crystal ball, and no one here does. And I think putting a number at reserve that everybody is comfortable with is the goal here today. I'd like to amend the motion to reflect that the tax increase be set at 1.25. Based on those calculations, we'll still be very close to the $3 million into reserves. And that's something to be proud of. We're increasing our reserves. If we get our reserves close to $3 million, it's more than last year, and it's a good start. And if we can keep down that path for the next couple of years, we're still increasing our reserves while we're keeping our tax rate competitive. So I encourage council to support the rate of 1.25.
Okay, so Councillor Clayton makes an amendment to reflect council direction to have a tax rate increase of 1.25%. Open for discussion and debate. Back to Councillor Plott next in the queue anyways, and so we're on Councillor Clayton's amendment.
Thanks, Mayor. Can I just get an update from corporate services of what that would mean that would be going to reserves with that amendment, please? And if I can wait for that, if somebody else has comments or conversation.
Sure. So while administration is calculating, we'll go to Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I wholeheartedly support Councillor Clayton's amendment. This is, I think, a happier medium that I was alluding to. I like the number of 1.25. Councillor Platt is absolutely right. This is a question about what we're putting into reserves, not as much about the tax rate. I'm hearing the reserves loud and clear as the bigger concerns. To be able to put nearly $3 million in is a great addition. We're on the right track, the right trend, both with taxes here and with the reserve, with this number that Councillor Clayton has put forward. It keeps us in a more competitive place, or gets us closer to a very competitive place, which is something that is important to us. And so I think it's good for both, as I said, good for both the tax rate and the reserves that we're putting away. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. I see administration is still calculating, so I'll go to Councillor Bressie on the amendment.
Great, thank you. I'm waiting to hear what administration says, but I'm likely to support this amendment and if it passes, likely to support the motion as amended. And for me, actually, the tax rate does matter in terms of I care about reserves, but also I'm very conscious of setting up the next council for success. And I know something that's happened in a lot of councils, not here, but elsewhere, is you drive taxes down and it looks really good year term, and then somebody else in a future term gets in and goes, holy smokes, taxes weren't sustainable. We need to jack it way up. That's not good for the next council. More importantly, that's very bad for the business community, and it can be even worse for vulnerable families. I want to avoid that. I do believe that we've got a responsible budget, so it makes sense to keep our budget going with inflation. Also note that right now the Alberta Economic Dashboard says that the CPI change in Alberta is 1.3%. This is pretty much bang on that, so I could support that.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. Look to our Corporate Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So a tax rate of 1.25% would realize a transfer to reserve of 1.56 million and would be an impact of $37.87 on the average residential property.
And the other portion that we had on the previous two sort of versions was so 1.56 million in transfer to reserves, and then the implication for the 2021 year in terms of tax rate increase. So we heard previously that the 1.5 would be 3.6%, the 0.75 would be 4.8%.
Thank you, Mayor Given. The tax rate in 2021 would be 3.9%.
Thank you. Councillor Palat on Councillor Clayton's amendment.
Thanks, Mayor Given, and thanks for that information. I think so. If I'm correct now, with the 1.6 we've agreed to, the 300 we're trending on that, we'd be putting close to $3.5 million in reserves this year with this 1.25%. I think that's a real win for us all the way around. I really do, and I know we talked about 1.5 being the goal. For me, that's where I was hoping to get, but we have an opportunity to do better, and so and achieve a lot of amazing things that come out of budget. So I'm really urging council to support this motion. It's probably a safer motion than mine. Mine was probably a little bit too aggressive. So appreciate the intent of going to 1.25. I think it's a really good number, and I think with the 3.45 million going back into reserves, that's something we should be very proud of, and CLTs should be very proud of as well.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Bressie.
My apologies, I'm getting less sharp. I'm realizing that I missed a question that's important to me. So a question for admin, and my apologies if you don't have it on you, but I'm wondering if you could tell me what's happened after the change we made to our capital tax budget in terms of what we're collecting next year for capital taxes. I know that one of the goals of the budget you proposed as administration was to increase the capital tax, and I'm wondering and I'm trying to get track of how well we're achieving that goal.
Sure. I see administration reviewing the spreadsheets and attempting to share the information. While they're finding that, I will say that I will just be consistent in my view. I'm very, very comfortable at the 1.51%. I appreciate the willingness to find a middle ground. And for me, my level of comfort was actually higher than the 1.5%. That's why I was supportive of a council meeting where we established a range. I think there are a range of alternatives and appreciate there's a range of perspectives. The 1.51% is right within on the lower range of my tolerance, actually, in terms of willingness to support that. I think what we're currently engaged in is figuring out the right size of the local government services. And we have this year essentially reduced the size of local government services. We've made some changes to different types of services and here and there, but effectively we're reducing the scale of local government. And that's not unreasonable, but I don't share some of my council colleagues' view that we need to be significantly smaller than we are today. I would agree that we could be more focused on community priorities, but what I see out of our process so far is that any savings achieved are to reduce the size of local government rather than to redirect local government's efforts to better priorities. I don't get a sense that we're doing that. It is really about the tax rate, and that's just not where my focus is. I see the administration still calculating over there. So we'll just wait until they're able to find out that information for Councillor Bressie. Councillor Bressie, does that information impact your vote on the amendment?
No, it doesn't impact my vote on the amendment.
Okay, so that's a request for additional information, so we don't need that for the amendment. Any discussion or debate then finally on Councillor Clayton's amendment? Councillor Clayton, do you wish to close on your amendment at 1.25? Okay, so no discussion or debate on Councillor Clayton's amendment. Then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. So we're back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Bressie, does that information impact your vote on the main motion as amended, or is it just for information?
If there's an answer ready, then it might, but I don't know if it's urgent.
Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So the adjustments that were approved reduced our capital tax need by $658,000 and brings our capital tax special levy to 8.8 million, which is about 2 million or so below our 2017 level.
So at this number, it does not bring the capital tax up in accordance with administration's original recommendation.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bressie?
Am I right in understanding that it's still below the 2017 level, but we were going to increase it by $2.7 million this budget? So am I right in assuming that that's still 2.1 million-ish above where it was last year?
Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I don't know if that information impacts anyone's decision. Councillor Bressie?
I don't think it impacts my decision, but that's something I just really want to highlight with council in terms of this is something we really need to think about next year. And it's great we raised it up $2 million, but in some ways that's just overcoming damage that's been done in the last couple years by decisions to. We really felt urgency to get the tax rate done. We achieved that, but now we've got work to backfill that. And I really hope as we're thinking about next year that we'll really think about priority of increasing that capital tax as well, which maybe there's room as we need to put less in reserves, but please, council, let's remember that piece of information.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any discussion or debate on the main motion as amended, which would see council direct administration deliver a budget reflective of a 1.25% increase and obviously the resultant transfer to reserves of what I think I understood to be 1.56 billion. Okay. I don't see anybody else in the queue. Then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I would move that I guess council move the budget 2020 budget deliberations decision to next council meeting to approve.
Council approve that. So I think we need two motions, one on the 2020 operational budget and then a subsequent motion on the 2022 to 23 capital plan. Is that correct? Okay, so this will be on the operational budget.
Yep.
Committee of the Whole recommend council approve. Any discussion or debate on that motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And can we get a motion on the 2022 to 2023 capital plan? Councillor Thiessen.
So I would move that council committee of the whole recommend council approve the 2022 to 2024 capital plan.
23, I believe.
23. Okay. Yeah, that's what I want. Sorry, I just heard 24, so I was going with it.
Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Thiessen. Any discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries, and I believe that concludes all our business for our budget discussion. Thank you very much to our administrative team for all their work. Not just over the course of the last couple of days, but also over the course of the preceding months that it took to get to the stage that we were, where council could review this. Thank you very much.